Hello, my name is Ann Buscho. Thank you for being here. I am a psychologist in Northern California. I live in Marin County. I'm talking to you now live from Lake Tahoe. I'm fortunate enough to be able to be here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and give people a few minutes to join us for this conversation. And I really hope it will be a conversation. I'm looking forward to your questions, your comments, your experiences. So I hope to make this an interesting conversation for all of us. I'll take a couple of minutes to share with you that I'm a psychologist working as a divorce coach. I'm seeing clients that are making the decision to divorce without court, primarily through a collaborative divorce process. Some of my clients are mediating, but I avoid working with people who are litigating. I find that process too painful for families and honestly too painful for me to observe the kind of destruction that litigation can cause. That said, of course, there are some situations where litigation really is the right choice when families do need a decision maker. But my personal preference is to work with people who are avoiding court when they choose to divorce. I also wrote a book called The Parent's Guide to Birdnesting, and that's this book. I hope you can see it. And this is a book for parents who have made the decision to separate or to divorce, but would like to do it in a way that is easier for kids, basically giving kids a soft startup. It means that children stay in the home and the parents take turns being on duty with them. The book is a complete guide to creating a written document with all of the agreements that parents would need to put their children first during a separation and in some cases for quite some time after the divorce. I want to thank the Minds Journal for inviting me to talk to you today. I appreciate that collaboration. And I'd like to start with some information, some basic information about co-parenting and cover some kind of basic points and then open it up to questions. So I think you just can enter your questions and I will respond to them. So when you are signing on, please tell me where you are signing on from, where you're watching this. Even if you're watching this later, the recorded version, please tell me where you're watching from. It's just fun to see where this might draw from. Okay, so let's get started with some basic information. So you probably are listening in because you're interested in divorce. Perhaps you've been divorced, perhaps you're thinking about divorce. Divorce is kind of a normal in our culture. When you know the statistics about divorce, you know already that almost half of all first marriages end in divorce. But surprisingly, second and third marriages have even higher statistics. Second marriages, it's over 60% end in divorce, and third marriages, more than 70% end in divorce. So even though divorce is normal in this culture, it's probably not normal for you, which is maybe why you're listening in, especially if you have children. According to the American Psychological Association, there is a divorce in the US every 36 seconds. It's a huge number. What that means is every day somewhere in the United States, there are 2,400 divorces. And that means 16,800 divorces every week and 876,000 divorces a year. So that's a lot of divorces. And about 60% of those divorces involve children under 18. So that's more than 500,000 divorces, 525,600 families divorce every year that have children. And that's why we're talking about co-parenting. So thinking about co-parenting, why is it important? So one way to think about it, and this is a question I ask all my clients, what is the story that you want your children to tell about your divorce. So when they're talking to their friends later, when they're in their 20s, sitting around with their friends, talking about their families, talking about their experience as children, talking about their parents' divorce, what's the story that you want them to tell? So that story, usually parents tell me that they want their kids to have a story that reflects not damage, that reflects some kind of peace in the family. They don't want their kids damaged by the divorce. And what we know is that conflict is what damages kids. Conflict between parents is what damages kids. And so the reason we talk about co-parenting is we want to find a way for you to parent your children without causing them damage. And that is the goal of co-parenting. Kids need both parents. Times have changed. When my parents divorced in the 50s, the assumption was that moms were the primary caretakers and dads were really kind of not that important, kind of expendable. And, you know, most dads would get a visit every other weekend or something like that. But now we know from the research that children can have multiple attachments, not just one attachment. They can be attached to both parents and grandparents and nannies and siblings, and attachments are important. And a divorce can disrupt an attachment with a parent unless you learn to co-parent. The reason it's so important for children to have these attachments with both parents is that later, as they move through school, they'll do better academically in school. They're much more likely to have good personal relationships of their own. They're less likely to develop mental health issues like anxiety or depression. So you create the story now, starting today, the story that they're going to be telling their friends when they get older. And that story hopefully will be a story where you work hard to minimize conflict between you and your ex or soon to be ex. So co-parenting is not that hard. In fact, it is something you have to learn. It's a skill that can be cultivated, but you can learn it, cultivate it, and you can be successful. So let's start with a couple of definitions first. There's a continuum of co-parenting. I think of it as a continuum. And at one end of the continuum is parallel parenting. And these are the parents that really cannot find a way to communicate with each other. And they need what I call a firewall between them in order to end the conflict. And if that's what it takes to end the conflict between two parents, then it's not the worst way to go because you've ended the conflict and benefited the children. The other end of that continuum is co-parenting. And co-parenting at the extreme end is parents who can work together, communicate frequently. They want to have consistency between both homes. They want to have consistent rules. They are very similar in their parenting style. And that if that end of co-parenting can work without conflict, then that's great for kids. So most people fall somewhere in between on that continuum. Most people fall somewhere short of either extreme. And both parents are not going to land on the same place. There may be one parent that really can't tolerate as much interaction with their ex as the other parent would like. And that means that parent maybe feels their ex is too controlling or intrusive or something like that. You have to find the sweet spot on that continuum where both of you can parent without conflict. So how does that work? There are some important tips for co-parenting. One is to have, and this is maybe the most important, is to have a parenting plan, a documented parenting plan. And that's what I do with my clients. It would include things, of course, like the schedule. When are you on duty? When are you off duty? It would include agreements around how the children will transition between you. It will include agreements around their education, their medical care, around travel, around childcare, and around issues like driving and when do children learn to drive, how do the parents make those decisions. It'll include decisions about what happens if a parent wants to move away. How close will the parents live to each other so to make the transitions easier for the children. It'll include agreements between you and your co-parent about dating and new relationships and when to introduce your children to a new relationship. And people have a lot of questions about this, and this is very often a very sensitive topic. So somebody like me, a divorce coach or a co-parenting counselor, can help you have those conversations. It'll include agreements about religion, about how future disagreements might be handled, about discipline, and so on. So the beauty of the parenting plan is that the two of you work together to create this agreement that kind of pre-decides many of the things that we can predict will come up as you co-parent. But of course, we can't predict everything. But we include in, or I always include in a parenting plan, what happens if something comes up and you haven't pre-decided it? Or what happens if your circumstances change and you want to change something in your agreement? So there's a protocol in the parenting plan, there should be, that says, what do you do when you can't agree about something? And that is in order to prevent a disagreement from escalating to becoming a conflict, because as we know, conflict damages children. The purpose of the parenting plan is to reduce or eliminate conflict because we know how it helps children to have parents who can work together and parent them together. That's what co-parenting is. So how do you begin this whole process of co-parenting? Once you have a parenting plan, is to acknowledge and just accept that your kids need and love both of you. They need and love their two parents. Most parents are imperfect, but your kids need and love you anyway. Maybe all parents are imperfect, but your kids need and love you anyway. There are very few exceptions to this. When there's a parent who's been abusive, there's a parent who's abandoned their children, there's a parent who has an unmanaged addiction and really can't take care of kids, that's of course an exception. But most parents, as imperfect as they are, can work together and their kids need and love both of them. So respect that you're both important to each other, to your children, even if you no longer love each other, even if you no longer even respect each other. Respect that you both have important parts to play in your children's upbringing. You're teaching them now and modeling to them how to deal with difficult situations. A divorce is a difficult situation. Learning to live in two homes is a really difficult situation for children. If you bird nest, you kind of help that transition. You help kids prepare for that. But right now, raising your kids, you are sharing your values and beliefs with your children, even if they're not the same as your spouses or soon-to-be ex-spouses or your co-parents. You're teaching your children how to treat people, how to build honest relationships, how to have safe relationships, how to express themselves, how to express their feelings, how to solve problems when they come up, because these are life lessons, right? How to communicate effectively, how to repair hurt emotions, or how to repair disruptions or ruptures in relationships. So you as parents are modeling respectful communication for your kids, and your kids are going to learn from you. They overhear you talking to each other on the phone, through text messages. The kids are curious and they're sponges, and they will pick up on the way that you and their other parent are communicating. So try to avoid the difficult conversations when you know your kids are around. So, for example, a really vulnerable time for kids is when they transfer from one parent to the other. And sometimes that's at the front door. And that is not the time to have a serious conversation. That is not the time to have a substantive conversation with your co-parent. What you can model for your kids is just being friendly, being amicable. It doesn't cost anything to just say hello, have a nice day, thanks for bringing the kids, whatever. But don't have a difficult conversation at the front door when you're exchanging your kids. This is a vulnerable time for kids because they're transitioning from one to the other of you. And they need a little time to make that transition. And that's why I always recommend that whenever possible, the parent that the children are leaving is the one who transports the children to the other parent. That way, the parent they're leaving is, in essence, kind of giving permission to make that transition and helping them leave their home and move to the other home. It's much more jarring for children to have a parent come and pick them up and pluck them out of whatever activity they were involved in, maybe, or it's a much more abrupt transition for children. So whenever possible, if you can transport your children to the other parent, it's going to be easier for your children. I think transitions also work really well when they happen at school. So one parent drops off in the morning and the other parent picks up in the afternoon. Whenever possible, I recommend that as well. So, so moving on to another tip about co-parenting, I would say aim for as much consistency as possible between your two homes. Consistency might be starting with the schedule, to have a predictable schedule that your kids know whose home they're at on Mondays and Tuesdays, for example, or when they're going to be seeing each of you. That said, it's also important to be flexible because you have a life and your co-parent has a life and things come up. So it's important to be flexible, but it's really important to have a good basic schedule that's consistent. That gives your kids some stability, some sense that their life isn't just complete chaos, and it helps them feel more secure. Now, I write a blog for Psychology Today. I've got about 90 articles on there. I upload a new article every 2 weeks. It's called A Better Divorce. You can look for that if you want. One of the things that I've written about is some of the pitfalls of co-parenting. And one is when you let your kids take on roles that are harmful to them. So there are 4 roles that are really harmful to kids when you're co-parenting, when you're divorced. Never let your kids become spies. Spies is like, so what'd you do at mom's house? Is she dating? Did you go out on a date? Did you see the guy? Was he good looking? Right? Don't ask your kids questions about what goes on at the other parent's house. If they volunteer information, that's of course different. They may need to debrief. They may need to download. But don't ask questions. Don't put them in that role of a spy. Don't put them in the role of a messenger. The messenger is something like, tell your dad I didn't get my support check yet. Or tell your dad I need him to be on time for a change. Right? These are things that I have heard parents say. Asking your children to carry messages, even messages that aren't quite as hostile as those, is putting them in a position they shouldn't be in. So if you have a message for your co-parent, send them a message, send them a text message, tell them directly. Don't let your kids do it. Don't put them in that role. Kids hate being in the role of spy or messenger. There's another role of confidant. It's really easy, especially perhaps with teenagers, to cast your kids into the role of confidant. This means that you're confiding in them things that you should be telling your friends or your therapist or your parents, but not your kids. Your kids don't need to know your deepest feelings, your worries, your concerns, your fears. This is unfair to them. also puts them into kind of a loyalty bind, because if you put them into that role, then they're more likely to look for who's at fault or who's to blame in the divorce and in the problems. Another difficult role for children is related to that, and that's being your ally. And that is when you recruit your kids to be on your side, that you want your kids to know the reason you're not married anymore is because mom had an affair or dad, took all the money or whatever it is. When you recruit your children to be your ally, you're not allowing them to love both of you. And as I said earlier, kids need to be able to love both of you, even if you don't love each other anymore. The confidant and allies, and all four of these roles, spies, messengers, confidants, allies, this can happen really easily. You can just slip into it kind of unconsciously. And so it's important to really observe yourself and be aware of how you're talking to your kids and what you're sharing with them. So it's important not to share the divorce with your kids. Don't talk about the divorce. Don't talk about the negotiations and what the outcome is. Don't talk about your financial worries. They never need to know the details of your divorce. They never need to know what your financial settlement is, or they don't really need to know the causes of the divorce, even though they want to know and they will ask. Giving them that information just causes them anxiety. And it pulls them into these kind of harmful roles, these harmful alliances. So this is about being self-aware and quite conscious of what you're sharing. It's important to not speak negatively of the other parent, because you have to remind yourself to love your children more than you hate your ex. I saw that somewhere and I thought it's so true. You have to remind yourself to love your children more than you hate your ex. So kids love it when you say things like, wow, you've got your mom's artistic talent, or you've got your dad's love of sports, and isn't that wonderful? So you can appreciate some of your ex's or your co-parents' abilities. Thanks, Paula, for your comment. You can really appreciate your co-parents' abilities and skills and express that to your kids. It makes your kids feel good. Again, it makes your kids conscious of the kind of lack of conflict between you and their co-parent or their other parent. So sometimes it's helpful for people to think of co-parenting as a business arrangement. So you're no longer married, but you have a business partner in the business of raising your children. Sometimes it helps to think of it that way to try to take the toxic emotions out of it. So just as you would with a business partner, have regular check-ins with your co-parent to talk about upcoming events, to talk about how your kids are doing, if they've expressed any concerns to either one of you. Have regular check-ins to talk about maybe changes in the schedule. Don't use these check-ins to attack each other or try to sort out what you couldn't sort out in the marriage or to express the emotions. Stay focused on your kids. Stay focused on problem solving. If you do that consistently, your co-parenting is going to be so much more successful. Be open to listening and compromising when issues come up. And if you reach an impasse when you can't agree about something, so should you let your 7th grade child attend a party? That might cause an impasse, for example, because one of you may feel that there could be drugs there or that it's not supervised well enough. So if you reach an impasse, try to listen and compromise and try to have an agreement up front that if you reach an impasse that you'll check in with a mediator or a therapist or a divorce coach or someone to help you break that impasse before it escalates, before the disagreement becomes conflict. So remembering it's the conflict between parents that damages your kids. You know, even if your kids don't witness the conflict directly, they can feel it in your hugs. When you've had conflict with your co-parent, you're going to hug your children differently, and they can feel that. They can see it in your facial expressions. So sometimes parents will tell me our kids are fine. They don't ever see us fight. I will say that I worked with children for decades, and I will tell you that they know. They can pick it up. They have exquisite radar. They can feel it. I think it is important to check in periodically with your co-parent just to see how the kids are doing, and to be sure to let each other know in advance before making any kind of changes that are going to affect your children. Let your co-parent know first. So these kinds of changes might be things like moving to a new home or introducing a new partner. Or later it might be if you have a plan to get married, or if you have a plan to have another child, or to adopt any children, if there will be stepchildren, and so on. So do this before you talk to your kids about these changes. It helps kids to know that their parents are working together, talking to each other, and doing everything possible to support their well-being. So I've had this experience with clients where a woman came back to me and said, you know, I'm so glad you made us have this agreement about telling the other parent before telling the kids about a new relationship, because if my kids had come home and told me the dad had a new girlfriend and he was going to introduce them, and if I didn't know, I would have just been so blindsided and so mad, and my kids would have seen that, and it wouldn't have been fair to them. So this way I was able to say, yeah, Dad told me, and I'm really looking forward to hearing how you like her. So that is why it's so important to check in with each other, especially before making any kind of changes. So there will be times when there'll be parenting moments that you might want to celebrate together. It could be things like birthday parties, your kids' birthdays, or graduations, or later weddings. It reassures kids when you can show up together to go to parent-teacher conferences, right? It's really reassuring to kids to know that their parents are still parenting them together, even if they're no longer married to each other. Some parents send each other photos or videos or text messages to share happy moments. So the first time your little girl rides a bicycle by herself, send a video of that first to the other parent. It's wonderful to share those kind of moments. And it makes the kids feel good, because then you can say, Mom sent me that picture of you riding your bicycle, and I'm so proud of you. So celebrate your children's successes together. Despite your divorce, you can do that. So in terms of logistics, one thing that's helpful is to use a shared online calendar. And Google makes that really easy. You can have a shared family calendar to keep track of everything related to your kids. It would be not only their schedule, but after school activities, play dates, medical appointments, homework projects, and when they're due, everything related to the kids. If you and your co-parent can agree to use this calendar regularly, that you both enter information and you check it regularly every day, it would be one of the, I can guarantee it will be one of the best communication tools you can have when you're co-parenting. You can schedule those regular check-ins with each other in advance and put those dates on the calendar. And you know, for some older children, it can be helpful for them to see the calendar too, because it will help them stay organized and grounded and kind of prepared for their transitions. So that's kind of a quick overview of co-parenting. I'm wondering if if you have any questions, if anyone would like to contribute something to this. I don't want to just be kind of a talking head. How do you tell if you're co-parenting with a narcissist or not? Okay, great question. Thank you. So first of all, I want to say that my experience is that when people are going through divorce, they all look like narcissists. And why do I say that? Because divorce is a life crisis that causes anxiety for all of us. And so what happens when we get anxious? We want to take care of ourselves. We want to make sure we're going to be okay. And when you're going through a divorce, you don't know the outcome. You don't know how you're going to be financially. You don't know if you're going to still be in the house. You don't know if you're going to have to move. You don't know. There's so much you don't know. And there's, as a result, a lot of anxiety. So that kind of self-centered focus on, am I going to be okay, is so normal during divorce. You know, a real narcissist, like the diagnosable personality disorder, is so rare. It's a buzzword now. I see it in the media all the time. Everyone thinks they're divorcing a narcissist, but the reality is that there are very few diagnosable narcissists. There are a lot of people who are very anxious about their future and how they're going to be in the future. And that can look very narcissistic, but that generally gets better as people, after the divorce is over, people have so many of those questions resolved, and it takes a year or two to recover from a divorce. After a divorce is over, it takes a year or two. When you're feeling stable and calm, the sort of narcissistic traits that have popped up will generally resolve. So how do you know if you're divorcing a narcissist? That's a great question. Maybe you'd like to elaborate on what makes you ask the question. Any other questions? During my childhood, I faced the situation with my parents that after they got divorced, they didn't set any kind of boundary when they were with me. Oh, yes. Yes, you're right. It's a great comment, Kylie. Thank you for that. I've had kids tell me that the most painful thing about divorce is their parents trash talking each other. It is devastating to kids because kids know that they have a part of each parent in them. A child knows, I'm part mom and I'm part dad, not just genetically, biologically, but they've internalized a lot of each parent. So when parents trash talk each other, when parents say terrible things about each other, it feels very personal to a child. It's as if you're asking a child to turn against a part of himself or herself. Maybe that was your experience, Kylie. You can tell me. My parents divorced when I was like 6 or 7. I'm way older than that now. My dad, who's 98, continued to call my mother the nightmare for years. And it really was only a few years ago that I had to say to him, you know, she's my mother. Please don't call her the nightmare anymore. It's not healthy for kids to hear a parent that they love and that they feel is a part of them spoken of in that way. So thank you for that comment, Kylie. What else? I'm curious about the narcissist question. If you feel like going back to that, I'd like to hear more about that. You know, one of the most damaging things that can come up in a divorce when parents aren't committed to co-parenting and putting their children first is something that's been written about a lot, which is when children resist or refuse to go to the other parent. We used to talk about that as parental alienation, when one parent would turn a child against the other parent. There are children who will resist and refuse to see a parent. And this is, to me, a symptom of terrible conflict between the parents. And the prediction is often that there will be long-term consequences here to the child. There will be damage. And in families that I've worked with where this was going on, ultimately the child that had turned against one parent ended up sort of aligning with that parent and rejecting the other parent. So it's something to be aware of, no matter how angry you are or how hurt you are by a betrayal or a rejection by your ex, to do everything you can to encourage your children to have a relationship with that parent, whether you like that parent or not. Ultimately, your kids will be healthier as a result. So what other questions do you have about co-parenting during and after divorce? If I'm watching the screen, so if something comes up, I will respond to it. But maybe I'll take the opportunity to talk a little bit about bird nesting, because I haven't really spoken about that much. And as I said, I did write the book, The Parent's Guide to Bird Nesting. That's what it looks like. A child-centered solution to co-parenting during separation and divorce. And the reason I wrote this book is that when I divorced back in the early 90s, our therapist, our couples therapist, suggested that we nest, but she really had no idea how to do that. The information we got was the kids stay in the house and you take turns as parents being there with the children. So we learned a lot about nesting. And this was not an easy divorce. It wasn't a high conflict divorce. We didn't go to court. We mediated. But we did decide to do this because we thought it would be better for kids, for our kids, we had 3 kids, to be able to stay in the house while we worked through our divorce. So we nested for 15 months. And along the way, we learned a lot of hard lessons about agreements that we should have had. And I still think that the nesting benefited our children. We nested until the divorce was over and we had figured out who was keeping the house and how we were each going to end up financially. And that's when we moved to 2 homes. I decided to write the book to make it easier for people to establish a nesting arrangement with good agreements and a successful arrangement. And in the process, I interviewed quite a few people who had nested. And I have a whole chapter in the book about a family that nested for 6.5 years and how they made that work. And I interviewed the children who are now adults about that experience as well. So nesting keeps kids stable and secure. It just doesn't disrupt their lives. Their routine continues pretty much as it's been. It's just that they have one parent at a time on a pre-agreed upon schedule. And if it's a temporary arrangement, and like generally is a temporary arrangement, it might be until the divorce is done, as ours was. It might be till your child graduates from high school. It could be until just the end of the school year. It could be until the house sells. There's sometimes a milestone when parents have already decided they will nest until that date. And other times it could be just one parent gives notice, I'm ready to end the nesting. And that happens commonly as well. I always suggest that you give 90 days notice so people can kind of get their lives organized. So that is that's a really soft startup for kids to the divorce, because when they start to move to going back and forth between 2 homes, they will have had this time to kind of get used to having parents as single parents. When you're co-parenting, you're really a single parent. You're a co-parent, you're a single parent. So there's a big learning curve to co-parenting that a lot of people don't think about before their divorce. So during marriage, there's almost always a kind of division of labor that parents agree to. It's not even written. It's not even maybe overtly stated, but one parent deals with the garbage. The other parent packs the kids' lunches, that sort of thing. When you are a single parent, you have to learn all the things you didn't do when you were in a married relationship and the labor was kind of divided. So it's a good idea to cut your co-parents some slack, especially in the beginning, as they learn to do the things that they really didn't have to do when they were married. So it could be things like packing the kids' lunches, helping them with homework, giving little kids a bath, whatever it is. Give your co-parent, cut them some slack so that they can learn to do those skills. The nice thing about nesting is the parents have this time to learn these skills before having to deal with transitioning kids between two homes. It also gives parents time to take care of themselves in the early part of the separation, especially. Self-care is really important. And so your off-duty time you can spend, getting exercise or seeing friends or getting some therapy if that's what you need. It's important to use that off-duty time to sort through your own feelings and to kind of get a vision of how you would like to see your life evolve post-divorce. So the nesting gives you time as parents to adjust to the idea of divorce, to work through the legal process, which can be difficult and challenging, and to learn the skills of being a single parent or a solo parent. So what else? Any other questions? How can I co-parent without hampering my child's mental health or mindset? Oh, that's such a good question. I'm so glad you're asking that, Christine. Co-parenting, the bottom line is to co-parent without conflict, because all the research shows that conflict is what damages kids. And I have said this so many times, and it is the most important point, that whatever you can do to minimize the conflict with your co-parent will benefit your child. So children, divorce per se, is that hard for kids? Of course it's hard. Does it have to cause long-term damage? No, it doesn't. It really comes down to what you model for your kids in terms of how one deals with a life crisis, how one deals with a difficult situation. If you allow your children to love both of you, spend time with both of you, if you and your co-parent are actively involved with your children, their school, their schoolwork, their friends, their lives, their extracurriculars, if both parents are actively involved with their kids, the kids can adjust to having one parent at a time on some kind of alternating schedule. That schedule is going to depend on the age of the children and your circumstances, your work schedule, and so on. But giving your children the room, the permission, the encouragement to love both of you is going to help your children weather the divorce. Now, the research also shows that children adjust within a year or two after the divorce is finished. A lot of that depends on how they were doing before the divorce. So if they were really having a rough time before the divorce, your kids are going to have a harder time after the divorce until they adjust. It'll take them longer. Hopefully, the end of the fighting, the end of the conflict or the stress or the tension in the home, the stormy weather in the home, once that has calmed down, your kids will begin to adjust. Does that answer your question? Is there more that you'd like to ask about that? Oh, grandparents. Thank you for that question, Irene. Grandparents, grandparents have no legal rights generally. I mean, grandparents have been known to go to court to try to get some custody in certain situations. It's very unusual, very rare. But in terms of parenting plans, one of the things that happens in divorce is grandparents tend to line up behind their biological child, right? So kids might only see their maternal grandparents when they're with their mom, and they might only see their paternal grandparents when they're with their dad. And yet in parenting plans, I always encourage parents to talk about allowing their kids to continue to have relationships with the extended family members, including grandparents, because it benefits them so much. So, for example, if one grandparent was the one who always picked up the kids on Wednesday afternoons, whatever the custody schedule ends up being, how nice for the kids to have that grandparent continue to pick them up on Wednesday afternoons, right? So if the parents can agree to that sort of thing, it will benefit them. It's not a legal question. It's a question that parents can think about. How can we support our children by keeping their grandparents involved? You know, the other piece that can come up is grandparents might say things that they probably shouldn't be saying to their kids about their other parent. So it's worthwhile to have that conversation with your parents. If you're getting divorced, to have that conversation with your parents, to say, you know, Tom and I are trying to do this in a peaceful way that really benefits the kids. And we really don't want our kids pulled into the middle of it. So please, you know, try to not say anything at all about the divorce. And if you do talk about the other parent, can you just say nice things? Can you be encouraging? Can you be kind? Sometimes it's helpful to have those. I mean, divorce is really emotional. It has ripples, right? Through the whole family, it has ripples. So grandparents can get really, really upset by divorce, especially when they're very attached to grandchildren. And this is going to perhaps change the amount of time they get to see them. I would certainly encourage grandparents to be included in all the sort of life events like birthday parties and graduations and so on. And I would really encourage grandparents to continue to have an amicable relationship with their ex son-in-law or daughter-in-law. It's not always so easy for them, but if they can do it. I know one grandparent who reached out to his son-in-law every few months and said, can we have lunch? You know, just to kind of let him know that even though there was a divorce, he wasn't divorcing him, right? So that grandparents can think about the role they want to play without hopefully choosing an alliance and making the conflict worse. So thanks for that question, Irene. What else? Any other questions about grandparents, about bird nesting, about co-parenting, about parenting plans, schedules? I can talk a little bit about schedules because I haven't really said much about that. So it's important to have, as I said, a fairly predictable, fairly consistent schedule. And younger kids need more frequent contact with their parents. So a week on, week off schedule is not great for young kids. They need to see each of you more frequently. It can get complicated with infants, really young kids. Sometimes I've worked with families where there was an infant that was still breastfeeding, for example. So the schedule needs to be tailored to the needs of the children. Assuming your children are not breastfeeding and they're not, that they're, you know, over, let's say, 2 or 3 years old, they can be on a schedule that could be like every 2 days. Even I've seen families even go like every other day. That gets exhausting for parents, but it works best when they're bird nesting. Shuffling kids back and forth every day or two between two homes is hard on them. So it's another reason to bird nest if you have young children. But as your children get older, they can tolerate more time apart. There's some very popular schedules now on the internet that you can look for. One is a 2-2-3, which is a really good schedule for younger kids. And that would look like this. It would be, let's say, Monday, Tuesday with mom, Wednesday, Thursday, dad, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, mom, and then the next Monday, Tuesday, dad, Wednesday, Thursday, mom, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, dad. So it's a 2-week schedule, alternating 2 days, 2 days, and 3 days. When they are a little older than that, a 2-2-5 schedule is a good schedule because it combines kind of frequent contact with some bigger blocks for kids to really settle in with a parent. And a 2-2-5 schedule would be that kids are always with one parent, let's say mom on Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday with dad, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday alternates. So 1 week mom would have 5 days in a row, and the next week dad would have 5 days in a row. And that seems to be one of the more common schedules that I've seen. I've also seen a schedule that is kind of a split week where the changeover happens on Wednesday. And there are all kinds of sort of variations to this, but basically just cutting the week in half. For some parents, they want to split the weekends. Some parents don't want to split the weekends. So that has to be taken into account. A week on, week off schedule is probably fine for older kids, middle school and older. A lot of parents want to do a midweek visit during that week on, week off schedule. So if the kids are with dad for a week, maybe Wednesday night, mom has dinner with the kids so that the kids don't go for a whole week without seeing the parents. This is something that depends a little bit on the kids. For some kids, that can be disruptive, confusing. For other kids, that they really want that and need that. Some parents have like a family dinner on Sunday nights. I mean, I like it when I see families that can really do this, and they just agree every Sunday night. They'll alternate homes. 1 week mom cooks, the next week dad cooks, and the whole family has dinner together with both parents. And some kids really like that. Other kids, it might be a little confusing. They might say, well, if mom and dad get along so well, why are they divorced? So you have to know your kids. You have to know how it sits with them. Yeah, so that's a little bit about scheduling to think about. I really encourage having either a co-parenting counselor or a divorce coach work with you to develop a co-parenting plan. There are a number of templates on the internet for parenting plans. And in most jurisdictions, that parenting plan can be either attached to or incorporated into your divorce settlement, your marital settlement agreement. So even though there are templates online, I think having a facilitated conversation with a divorce coach is really helpful because a good divorce coach will share research, share their experience, share information that because divorce isn't normal for you, but it is in my work, having that information can help you make decisions that you might not otherwise make. So if there aren't any more questions, I think I'll start to summarize here. Oh, Angela, thank you so much for your question or comment. Let's see. I feel nothing will ever work. I wish I knew now what I knew then. There was a grudge held about the divorce. I didn't know how else to keep the peace when every single time we were near each other, it was an argument from the past. Now, out of the blue, the other parent has moved on a whim out of state. The other parent has never put them on the plane. So I don't see the rest of your message. If there's a question, if one parent has moved, my experience with that is if one parent moves, the courts, assuming the courts get involved, will try to keep the children in the same place where they are. They're not going to force the children to move with a parent. They can't stop a parent from moving, but they won't generally want to uproot the children from their community and move them with the other parent unless both parents have agreed to do that. So are you asking, Angela, about visits, about the children going back and forth to visit a parent who's now moved out of state? If that's the case, and you haven't been able to reach an agreement with your ex, I would assume that you would need an outside decision maker if you haven't been able to mediate that. It is hard when kids are on a schedule where they're visiting a parent out of state. I worked with a family once where the mom moved back east and the dad stayed here in California. The children, the courts basically said the children stay with dad. But every vacation, spring break, summer break, winter break, the children went back east to be with their mom. And that seemed to work for them. And ultimately, when the children were out of high school, they both chose colleges on the East Coast to be near their mom. So somehow in the long run, these things kind of work themselves out. I really am sorry to hear about all the conflict you're having with your ex. And I truly hope that you're able to somehow scale that back. If he starts an argument, I would cut it short. I would say we can only talk about this in a civilized way, in a constructive way. Let's look at this as a problem to be solved. If that can't be done, then get somebody involved to help you. There are, in my area, we have parenting coordinators who are basically like private decision makers. If the two of you agree to work with a parenting coordinator, you agree to allow that person to resolve the conflicts. You allow that person to make the decisions over things that you can't agree on. And in terms of talking about the past, you mentioned that in your comment, just don't go there. Do it with your therapist. Don't go there. I mean, if he's still holding a grudge, I'm really sorry. But you don't need to have those conversations. It will probably not be a good idea for you or him or your children. So I hope, I didn't see the last part of your comment, Angela, so I hope that I addressed the question that you had. Any other questions, please throw them at me. I'm ready for it. And otherwise, I hope that you'll take a look at my website. It's my website is drannbuscho.com. Oh, that's not it. I'm so sorry. It's drannbuscho.com. Oh yeah, there it is. The first website, that's my sort of Authors Guild website for my books, and I hardly ever use that, but I do use the drannbuscho.com website. So you can go there, you can contact me through that website. You can contact me through the other website too, but the one that I really use is the drannbuscho.com website. You'll find a lot of information on that website about nesting and co-parenting. You'll find a blog there and so on. It's a much more developed website. I haven't really done much with the first one, so I probably should. So thank you for joining me. Again, I hope to see where you're all signing in from, and I hope that your co-parenting road is not too difficult, that you put your kids ahead of your own emotions, that you remember to love your children more than you hate your ex. And thank you again for joining me today. Bye-bye.